Brookside was a town painted by seasons. In summer, children played under the warm embrace of the sun. In fall, the streets were carpeted with crimson leaves. But on this day, the town's familiar hues were shrouded under a sky thick with foreboding clouds. A sharp wind cut through the streets, rattling shutters and carrying with it the first whispers of an impending storm. In a corner of the town, just outside the market square, Shadow lingered by the old stone fountain. His fur was as dark as the storm above, making him almost invisible as he darted between alleys. To the townsfolk, Shadow was a ghostly figure, a stray that moved like smoke and was as elusive as the wind. But today his restlessness was different. His ears twitched, and he sniffed the air, sensing the heavy tension before a storm. But something else gnawed at him too, an invisible thread tugging at his instincts. Across town, 6-year-old Emma Turner played in her yard, blissfully unaware of the gathering tempest. The breeze tugged at her curls as she spun in circles. Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed bear with a lopsided grin, clutched tightly in one hand. The playful squeal of a child, so ordinary yet fleeting, echoed down the lane and caught Shadow's attention. "Emma, stay close," Sarah Turner called from the porch. Her voice was warm, but tinged with the familiar note of caution that mothers carry. Emma nodded, half hearing as she chased the butterfly dancing just beyond reach. Its yellow wings glimmered against the brooding sky, a small piece of sunshine trapped in flight. The wind changed, blowing stronger, and Emma stumbled forward, leaving the familiar embrace of her yard. She crossed into the wild edge of the woods, where the trees stood taller and closer, their gnarled branches seeming to close ranks behind her. The butterfly vanished, leaving only the whisper of leaves and the sudden patter of raindrops on her cheeks. She turned, expecting to see her house, but the world had blurred under a veil of rain. "Mummy," her small voice quivered, the woods swallowing it whole. The first bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in a harsh flash of white. In the alley, Shadow's ears perked at the distant cry. He stood stock still, heart thumping as the rain thickened around him. Something pushed him forward, a drive deeper than hunger or cold, a need to find the source of that sound. Thunder boomed, rolling through the woods like a drumbeat of giants. Emma ran, her shoes slipping in the mud as rain soaked through her clothes. Each branch she brushed against left wet streaks on her skin, each step pulling her deeper into unfamiliar territory. She called for her parents again, but only the wind answered, whipping her hair into her eyes and stinging her cheeks. Shadow bounded into the underbrush, his paws squelching through puddles as he traced the scent of rain, mud, and fear. His sharp eyes caught the pale shape of Emma under the half-light of storm clouds. The sight filled him with urgency, his body a blur as he closed the distance. Emma tripped, her knees hitting the muddy ground. She sobbed once, the sound barely audible over the wind. When she looked up, a pair of deep brown eyes met hers. Shadow stood before her, his black fur slick with rain, his posture steady and calm. Emma's breath caught. He wasn't like the strays she'd seen in town. He was bigger, his eyes filled with something more than the wild. "Doggy," she whispered, her voice cracked and small. Shadow moved closer, nuzzling her arm and offering his warmth. He barked once, a sharp, reassuring sound that cut through the howling storm. Shadow circled Emma, positioning himself between her and the wind. The cold bite of rain seeped into his fur, but he ignored it. Emma leaned into him, clinging to the soft, damp fur for comfort. Her tiny frame shivered with the cold, and her tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. The woods around them groaned as the storm reached its peak. Branches snapped overhead, sending shivers through the trees. Shadow barked again, not in fear, but as a signal, a call that reverberated through the forest, filled with urgency and hope. Far away, flashlights flickered through the dark, cutting arcs of light between the trunks. The search party, led by Mike Turner and flanked by police and neighbors, moved in a desperate formation. The storm made communication difficult, and every passing minute carved deeper lines of worry into Mike's face. "Emma!" he shouted, his voice raw. The rain lashed at him, soaking through his coat. Sarah followed close behind, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, clutching the small scarf Emma had worn that morning. Sarah's mind raced with memories, Emma's first laugh, her toddling steps across their kitchen floor, the way she clutched Mr. Whiskers at night. Each memory was a tether to hope, but the cold reality of the storm threatened to sever that line. She clutched her husband's arm, looking up at him with desperation. "Mike, we have to find her," she choked out, the wind stealing her words. He nodded, squeezing her hand with a strength that belied his own fear. The beam of a flashlight caught movement, a flash of black in the rain. "There! Over there!" someone shouted. The search party rushed forward, their voices mingling with the storm. Shadow's ears perked at the noise, and he barked again, more insistent this time. Emma's head lifted, hope rekindling in her tired eyes. "Mommy," she called, her voice small but alive. Sarah broke through the thicket, her knees buckling when she saw her daughter leaning against the stray dog, both shivering but safe. "Emma!" The shout tore from her throat as she ran forward, wrapping her arms around the little girl and pulling her close. The search party circled them, murmurs of astonishment at the sight of the black dog standing protectively over Emma. Mike dropped to his knees, embracing his family as tears streamed down his face, mixing with the rain. He reached out a trembling hand to Shadow, who sniffed it cautiously before allowing the man to scratch behind his ears. Shadow stood quietly as the warmth of human hands patted his drenched fur, but his eyes stayed on Emma, watching for any sign that she might need him. A police officer stepped forward with a blanket, draping it around Emma's shoulders and giving Shadow a soft pat. "You're a good boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow's tail gave a small wag, his body too exhausted for more. Back at the Turner home, the living room glowed with firelight. The scent of cocoa and wet fur mingled as Emma sat bundled in blankets, her eyes drooping but content. Shadow lay at her feet, his eyes watchful and serene, even as sleep tugged at him. He had found his place, no longer a nameless shadow, but a hero. Sarah watched the pair, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. "He stays," she whispered to Mike, who nodded without hesitation. Shadow's eyes fluttered shut, the soft hum of Emma's voice fading as she whispered, "Good doggy." That night, the Turner household was filled with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and quiet reverence. Emma had fallen asleep in her room, her fingers still lightly gripping Mr. Whiskers, while Shadow rested at the foot of her bed. His ears twitched at every small sound, the creak of the house, the rustle of leaves outside, as if he couldn't yet trust that danger had passed. Mike sat in the hallway, a silent sentinel, watching the doorway to Emma's room. He glanced at Shadow, marveling at how this stray dog had become their hero. The storm outside had died down to a gentle patter, but inside, the emotional storm had left its mark. Sarah joined Mike, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. "Can you believe it?" she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. Of all the things to happen, that dog saved her. Mike nodded, eyes softening as he watched Shadow shift slightly, still vigilant. "He's more than just a stray," he whispered. "He's family now." The next few days were filled with whispered conversations and amazed retellings of Emma's rescue. Neighbors stopped by to drop off casseroles and blankets, each visitor glancing in awe at the dark-furred dog lying comfortably on the Turners' living room rug. Emma, still recovering from the ordeal, became attached to Shadow in a way that only a child could. She would drape necklaces of daisies around his neck, read him her storybooks, and sneak him treats when she thought no one was looking. Shadow, for his part, took to his new life with quiet contentment, but never lost the alertness that had saved Emma on that stormy night. There were moments when Shadow would perk up at a sudden noise, his gaze hardening before he'd relax. It was as if he knew he had to stay ready, just in case. Mike and Sarah noticed this and felt an even deeper respect for the dog that had come into their lives so suddenly. Word of the rescue spread beyond Brookside. A journalist from a local newspaper came to the Turner home to interview the family. The story of the stray dog who had found and protected a lost girl became the talk of the region. Pictures of Emma hugging Shadow, their smiles wide and joyful, were featured on the front page. As recognition grew, so did the offers. A pet supply store in town donated toys and food, and the local vet offered free checkups for Shadow. The vet's first examination revealed that Shadow was healthy, but had old scars, marks that hinted at a hard life, before he found his way to Brookside. Emma's eyes welled with tears when she saw the faded scars. "Did he get hurt before?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah said, running a gentle hand over Emma's head. "But he's safe now, just like you." The vet nodded, a soft smile playing at her lips. "He's a tough one, that's for sure. It's no wonder he fought to protect her." Months passed, and winter settled over Brookside. The first snow was met with Emma's shrieks of delight as she built a snowman in the yard, with Shadow bounding through the snow beside her. The bond between them was no longer just extraordinary. It had become a daily, unspoken truth. Shadow was Emma's guardian, friend, and confidant. But not all nights were peaceful. One evening, as a fresh storm gathered on the horizon, Emma woke up with a start. The shadows in her room seemed larger, darker. Lightning flashed, followed by a rumbling thunder that shook the window panes. She whimpered, clutching Mr. Whiskers tighter. Before she could cry out, Shadow was at her side, his warm breath and steady presence soothing her fear. He nudged her with his nose, licking her hand until her giggles replaced the sob that had been forming in her throat. Emma wrapped her arms around him, drawing strength from his calmness. "Thanks, Shadow," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, surrounded by the soft snores of her protector, Emma felt safe. The following summer, Brookside hosted its annual fair, an event that filled the air with the scent of popcorn and laughter. Emma tugged Shadow along by a bright blue leash, though he walked beside her with the ease of an old friend. Children pointed and smiled at the famous dog, and Emma beamed with pride. It was during a game of hide-and-seek with friends that the afternoon took an unexpected turn. Emma, giggling, hid behind the old oak near the edge of the fairgrounds. The voices of her friends drifted farther away as they searched in the opposite direction. Suddenly, a rustle in the nearby brush made Emma freeze. A large, unfamiliar dog stepped out, eyes sharp and teeth bared. Its low growl sent a shiver down Emma's spine. Before she could react, Shadow leapt between them, his stance protective and fierce. The strange dog barked, but Shadow didn't back down. Fairgoers rushed over as Shadow and the stray circled each other. Mike reached Emma just as the strange dog backed down, darting away into the woods. Shadow's hackles lowered, and he turned, licking Emma's cheek as if to reassure her. The crowd murmured in awe, and the town's respect for the black dog deepened even more. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the Turner yard, a man in a worn-out coat stood by the fence. His eyes were tired, and his hands fidgeted as he called out, "Hey there, fella." Shadow's ears twitched, and he glanced at the man with cautious recognition. Mike stepped outside, his protective instinct kicking in. "Can I help you?" he called, voice firm. The man's eyes shifted from Mike to Shadow. "Used to be my dog," he said quietly, nodding towards Shadow. "Lost him a couple of years back. Name's Jasper." Silence fell between them. Mike glanced at Shadow, whose tail had stilled, eyes locked on Jasper with a look that was neither friendly nor fearful. "We found him last fall, during a storm," Mike said, his voice measured. He waited for Shadow's reaction, but the dog remained where he was, now turning to press his head into Emma's outstretched hand. The man sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Looks like he's found a better home. Take care of him. Will you?" Mike nodded, a silent promise that they would. Emma wrapped her arms around Shadow, who let out a soft huff, his eyes following Jasper until the man's silhouette disappeared down the road. Years flowed like the river, swift and unstoppable. Emma grew tall, her hair flowing down her back in curls, but Shadow grew older, his muzzle turning white. Yet, even with age, his eyes never lost their spark, and his heart never wavered. One final storm came, much like the one that had brought them together. The night was fierce, the wind screaming against the windows. Emma sat beside Shadow on the old rug, her fingers combing through his fur as thunder rolled in the distance. "You're still my hero, Shadow," she whispered, tears catching in her lashes. The storm passed, and with the first light of dawn, Shadow closed his eyes one last time, surrounded by the warmth. The town gathered at the park to honor Shadow's memory. A bronze statue was erected near the town hall, capturing the likeness of a dog with ears perked and eyes full of quiet determination. Beside it stood Emma, now adult, with a child of her own clinging to her hand. "Who's that, Mommy?" the little boy asked, pointing to the statue. "That's Shadow," Emma said, her voice soft but strong. "The bravest dog who ever lived." The storm that had once changed everything became a story told for generations, a tale of how a stray dog found his family and became their guardian angel, long after the rain had ceased to fall.